For the 10th time, her name flashed across his phone. Isabella. With a contemptuous swipe of his thumb, Damien Blackwood silenced the call. His focus cemented on the presentation before him. He was on the verge of the biggest deal of his life, a multi-billion-dollar partnership that would catapult Blackwood Corp into the stratosphere. He couldn't be bothered with his wife's trivialities, what the housekeeper needed, or a problem with the caterer for one of her charity luncheons. He saw her as a beautiful, quiet accessory to his life, a masterpiece he'd acquired but rarely stopped to admire. He believed he was securing his future in that boardroom, never imagining that the woman he was so carelessly ignoring held the absolute power to shatter his world with a single sentence. What happens when the world's most underestimated wife decides she's done being invisible? The silence in the penthouse was a living entity. It breathed in the vast empty spaces between the minimalist Italian furniture and clung to the cold floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. For Isabella Rossi Blackwood, this silence was the soundtrack of her marriage. It was a silence paid for by her husband's relentless ambition, a quiet curated by a staff she rarely saw, and a loneliness she had learned to wear like a bespoke Chanel jacket, impeccably tailored and hiding everything underneath. She held her phone, the screen dark, her reflection looking back at her. Her call log showed 11 attempts to reach her husband, Damien. 11 calls sent into the void. Each one had been more urgent than the last. She had started the day with a simple text. Damien, I need to speak with you urgently. It's about my grandfather. No reply. An hour later, she called. The call went to voicemail after 2 rings, a clear, deliberate rejection. She tried again. Same result. Her calls became more frantic as the morning wore on. The news from the family estate in Geneva wasn't just bad. It was seismic. It was a world-altering event that required her, and by extension, her husband, to act. But Damien was unreachable, cocooned in the world that mattered to him, the world of power, money, and prestige. Inside the glass-walled conference room of Blackwood Corp, Damien was at the peak of his power. He paced before a holographic display, his custom Tom Ford suit fitting him like a second skin. His voice was a low, confident baritone, mesmerizing the investors from a Japanese tech conglomerate. Blackwood Corp doesn't just build smart cities, he declared, his hand slicing through the air. We build the future of human interaction. We are on the precipice of securing a revolutionary energy patent. But to do that, we need a partner with vision. A partner with legacy. His phone buzzed on the polished mahogany table. Isabella. Chloe Sterling, his sharp, ambitious vice president, noticed his glance. Her red dress was a slash of color in the otherwise monochromatic room. Everything all right, Damien? She murmured her voice, just for him. He waved a dismissive hand, not breaking eye contact with the lead investor. Just my wife. Probably a crisis over the color of the new hydrangeas for the garden. Chloe's lips curved into a smirk. She had always viewed Isabella as a relic, a beautiful but useless artifact from an older world. She was the one who worked alongside Damien, who understood the pressure, the kill-or-be-killed nature of their business. Isabella, in her eyes, was just the woman who planned his dinner parties. Some of us deal with empires, others with flower beds. Chloe whispered her comment, a drop of poison, meant to bond them together in their shared superiority. Damien's chest puffed out slightly. He loved that. He loved being seen as the man who dealt in empires. It was the identity he had constructed for himself brick by painstaking brick. He had come from nothing, a scholarship kid who'd clawed his way to the top. He had married Isabella Rossi 7 years ago, enchanted by her quiet grace and the aura of old-world European class that clung to her. He hadn't known the extent of her family's wealth. The Rossi name was respected, but notoriously private. He just knew she was the perfect elegant piece to complete the picture of Damien Blackwood, the self-made titan. He had provided her with a life of unimaginable luxury. What could she possibly need from him so urgently? Whatever it was, it couldn't be more important than this deal. Nothing was more important than this deal. This deal was his ticket to the inner circle, the rarefied air inhabited by the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts of the modern age. And the key to that world was the Metropolitan Legacy Gala that evening. It wasn't just the biggest charity event of the year. It was a hunting ground. The gala was sponsored by the Ethelgard Foundation, a notoriously private and powerful philanthropic organization. For months, Damien had been trying to get a meeting with its leadership. The foundation was sitting on the very energy patent he needed, a revolutionary technology they had acquired, and were looking for the right corporate partner to develop. The head of the foundation was a complete enigma, known only by the initials AR. No one had ever seen them in public. Tonight, AR was rumored to be making their first public appearance. Securing even 5 minutes with this person would be the coup of a lifetime. It would validate everything he had ever worked for. He silenced his phone again, the vibration a minor annoyance, and turned his full charismatic attention back to the investors. Gentlemen, Blackwood Corp is not just an investment. It is a dynasty in the making. Back in the silent penthouse, Isabella put her phone down. The 11th call had been answered not by Damien, but by his voicemail. A cold, automated voice for a cold, automated life. She walked over to the window, her hand resting on the cool glass. The view of the city was dizzying, a concrete jungle of ambition and dreams. It was Damien's world. He had brought her here, installed her in this gilded cage, and then promptly forgotten she had wings. A tear, hot and sharp, traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of fury. The news from Geneva had settled in her bones, a heavy, cold weight. Her grandfather, Alessandro Rossi. The patriarch, the titan. The man who had built a quiet empire based on integrity and innovation had passed away that morning. He was the founder and silent chairman of the Ethelgard Foundation. His final letter to her, delivered by his solicitor via a secure channel, had been clear. With his passing, the full responsibility, the title of chairwoman and the control of its vast resources now fell to her. She was A.R., Alessandra Rossi, the name she used in that world, a tribute to her grandfather. He had been preparing her for this her entire life, not with business lessons, but with lessons in character, in empathy, in seeing the value of people over profit. Her urgent calls to Damien hadn't been about a family tragedy in the abstract. They had been a final test, a final hope that the man she had married, the man she had once loved, would be her partner in this monumental transition. She had wanted to tell him to face this new chapter with him, but he hadn't answered. He had dismissed her grief, her inheritance, her entire identity as an inconvenience. She wiped the tear away with the back of her hand. Her expression hardened. The quiet, graceful wife was gone, replaced by the woman her grandfather had raised her to be. Damien wanted to meet the head of the Ethelgard Foundation. Fine. He would get his wish. She turned from the window and walked toward her dressing room, a place Damien called her sanctuary, but which had always felt more like a beautifully decorated prison cell. Tonight its doors would open and she would walk out, not as Mrs. Blackwood, but as herself. And the world, especially her husband, was about to find out exactly who that was. Damien's energy was electric as he burst through the penthouse doors late that afternoon. The deal with the Japanese investors was provisionally signed contingent on one thing securing the Ethelgard patent. The Gala was no longer just an opportunity, it was the final battlefield. Isabella. He called out, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. He loosened his tie, his mind already racing, planning his approach, his pitch, his conquest. We need to leave in 2 hours. I had a dress sent over from Dior. It's in your dressing room. Black. Sophisticated. You need to look the part tonight. Isabella emerged from the hallway. Not from her dressing room, but from her private study, a room Damien rarely entered. She was already dressed, but not in the designer gown he had sent. She wore a simple, elegant silk blouse and tailored trousers. Her hair was pulled back, and she was holding a leather-bound folio. Her face was serene, but her eyes held a new, unfamiliar light. It was a cold, clear light, like a winter dawn. "I won't be wearing the Dior Damien," she said, her voice even and calm. It was a stark contrast to his frenetic energy. Damien stopped, irritated. This was not the time for games. "Don't be difficult, Isabella. Tonight is the most important night of my career. I need you to be perfect." "The black dress is perfect." "It's a beautiful dress," she conceded, placing the folio on the large mahogany table in the center of the room. "But it's not suitable for my role this evening." He laughed, a short, incredulous bark. "Your role? Your role is to be my wife. To smile, look stunning, and charm the ancient wives of my potential business partners. That's it. Now please go get ready." He started to walk past her, but she didn't move. "My grandfather died this morning, Damien." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Damien froze. He turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time that day. He saw the faint redness around her eyes, the subtle tension in her jaw. A flicker of guilt pierced his armor of ambition. He had ignored her calls. All 11 of them. "Izzy, I'm sorry." He stammered the words, feeling clumsy and inadequate. "I didn't know. My phone was... I was in the meeting of a lifetime." "I know," she said, and the simple affirmation cut deeper than any accusation. "You always are." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his mind trying to recalibrate. A death in the family. This was a complication. Okay. Look, we can cancel. We'll stay home. We'll make arrangements to fly to Geneva tomorrow. It was the proper thing to say, the husbandly thing. But even as he said it, his stomach churned at the thought of missing the gala, missing his chance at AR. "There's no need to cancel," Isabella replied, her composure unwavering. "I still have to be there. And so do you. You wouldn't want to miss it." Damien was confused. "What are you talking about? Your grandfather just died. Why would you want to go to a party?" "It isn't a party for me. It's a responsibility," she said, tapping the folio. "Alessandro's passing has accelerated some things. There are duties I must now formally assume." He still wasn't understanding. He saw her grief as a logistical problem, an emotional detour from his path to glory. "Look, whatever it is, it can wait. A night of mourning is the least you can do. It's what's expected. What's expected of me is no longer your concern," she said, the coldness in her voice now unmistakable. She turned and walked toward her dressing room. I will be ready to leave in an hour, but I will be taking my own car. Damien stood alone in the vast living room, baffled and annoyed. Her grief was making her irrational dramatic. He'd apologize properly later, buy her a diamond bracelet to make up for his inattention. But tonight, he had a mission. He would go to the gala, find AR, and secure his destiny. He'd deal with his wife's strange mood later. He assumed she would eventually put on the Dior dress and come to her senses, sliding back into the role he had assigned her. An hour later, as Damien's Bentley was pulling up to the front of their building, another car, a sleek, understated but obviously armored Maybach, pulled up behind it. He watched, puzzled, as Isabella exited the building. She had not put on the Dior. Instead, she wore a custom-made Armani gown in a deep sapphire blue. The color was regal commanding. Around her neck was a single breathtaking piece of jewelry, a diamond and sapphire necklace he had never seen before. It wasn't flashy. It was regal, a piece that spoke of generations of wealth, not a single season's bonus. Her hair was styled in an elegant chignon, and her makeup was subtle but flawless. She didn't look like a grieving granddaughter. She didn't look like his quiet, unassuming wife. She looked like a queen. A man in a dark suit, clearly a professional security detail, opened the door of the Maybach for her. She didn't even glance at Damien or his Bentley. She simply got into her car, and it pulled away smoothly into the Manhattan traffic, heading downtown. Damien was left standing on the sidewalk, a storm of confusion and anger brewing inside him. Who was this woman? Where did that car come from? And that necklace? It must have been worth more than his first-year profits. Chloe called him, then her voice crisp and impatient. Damien. Where are you? The pre-gala reception is starting. Everyone who's anyone is here. I'm on my way, he snapped, getting into his car. He slammed the door shut, his mind reeling. For the first time in their 7 years of marriage, he had the unsettling feeling that he didn't know his wife at all. A part of him was furious at her defiance, but another smaller part was unnerved. It was the feeling a chess player gets when his opponent makes a move so unexpected, so outside the known rules of the game, that he realizes he might not be playing against a novice after all. He pushed the thought aside. He had more important things to worry about. He had to find AR. His entire future depended on it. The Carlisle Hotel was transformed. A river of black-tie guests flowed up the grand staircase, their diamonds and laughter echoing in the gilded hall. This was Damien's natural habitat. He moved through the crowd with the predatory grace of a shark, a glass of champagne in one hand, his eyes scanning, assessing hunting. Chloe, a vision in emerald green, was at his side. The CEO of Omnicorp is by the bar, she murmured. And I saw Jacob Stern, the private equity king, talking to a senator near the terrace. The target, however, is nowhere to be seen. The target was AR. The whispers about the head of the Ethelgard Foundation were everywhere. Some said AR was a reclusive tech billionaire who had cashed out and turned to philanthropy. Others whispered it was an old European aristocrat. The mystery only added to the Foundation's allure. Its sponsorship of the gala was a statement of immense power. They'll be here, Damien said, his confidence a carefully constructed facade. Isabella's dramatic exit had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Someone this powerful doesn't sponsor an event like this and not show up. They'll make an entrance. He saw a few familiar faces, rivals he'd bested, allies he'd cultivated. They greeted him with the requisite mix of professional courtesy and thinly veiled envy. He was Damien Blackwood, the man of the hour, the one whose name was on everyone's lips. He was exactly where he wanted to be. Then he saw her. Isabella was standing near a marble column, speaking with a man he recognized instantly. Marcus Thorne, the formidable silver-haired chairman of the Federal Reserve. They weren't making small talk. Isabella was speaking, and Thorne was listening with an intensity and deference Damien had never seen him afford anyone, let alone himself. Damien's smile tightened. What was she doing talking to Marcus Thorne? He started towards them, a possessive proprietary anger rising in him. Chloe put a hand on his arm. "Careful, Damien," she warned. "Don't make a scene. People are watching." He brushed her off. He was her husband. He had every right. As he approached, he saw Isabella laugh at something Thorne said. A genuine, confident laugh he hadn't heard in years. She looked radiant, poised, and utterly at ease in this world of power he thought was exclusively his. "Isabella, darling," he said, his voice a little too loud, forcing his way into the conversation. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture of ownership. "I was wondering where you'd gone." Isabella didn't flinch. She simply turned her head slightly, her sapphire eyes meeting his. The coldness in them was startling. "Damien, I was just catching up with an old friend. You know Marcus, of course." Thorne turned his expression unreadable. "Blackwood," he said, his nod curt. There was no warmth in it. "My deepest condolences on your loss, Isabella. Alessandro was a giant, a mentor, and a dear friend. The world is poorer for his absence." Damien was stunned into silence. Marcus Thorne knew Isabella's grandfather, knew him well enough to call him a mentor. "Thank you, Marcus," Isabella said, her voice warm for the first time that evening. "He always spoke very highly of you." Damien felt like an intruder at his own party. He tried to recover, to assert his place. "Yes, a terrible loss. We're all devastated. I was just telling Isabella she shouldn't have come tonight, but she insisted on being brave." He tried to frame it as her emotional whim, painting himself as the concerned husband. Isabella's smile was thin and sharp as a razor's edge. "Bravery has nothing to do with it. Some duties can't be postponed." She turned her back on Damien, returning her full attention to Thorne. "Marcus, we must discuss the Foundation's new arts endowment next week. My grandfather left some very specific instructions. The Ethelgard Foundation." The name hit Damien like a physical blow. He stared at his wife, at the impossible connection being drawn in front of him. No, it was impossible. A coincidence. She must be on one of the Foundation's junior boards, a position he'd probably secured for her years ago and forgotten about. A little charity work to keep the wives of important men busy. That had to be it. Thorne nodded. "Of course, Madam Chairwoman. My office will be at your disposal." Madam Chairwoman. The words echoed in the sudden roaring silence of Damien's mind. He felt the blood drain from his face. Chloe had come up behind him, having heard the entire exchange. Her perfectly made-up face was a mask of disbelief. Isabella finally turned to face them both. She looked at Damien, and for the first time, he saw a glimmer of what looked like pity in her eyes. "Damien, you look pale," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "Perhaps you should get some air." She then looked at Chloe, her gaze sweeping over the other woman from head to toe. It was not a jealous glare, but something far more chilling, a dismissal. It was the look one gives to a piece of furniture that is about to be replaced. Without another word, Isabella excused herself from Thorne, and glided away into the crowd, which seemed to part for her as if by magic. Heads turned. Whispers followed in her wake. She wasn't just another beautiful woman in a designer gown anymore. A palpable aura of power now surrounded her, an invisible current that Damien, for all his ambition, had never been able to generate. Chloe finally spoke, her voice a strained whisper. "What the hell was that, Madam Chairwoman?" "It's a mistake. It has to be." But Damien knew it wasn't. The pieces were slotting together in his mind with horrifying speed. The secrecy of her family. The calls he ignored. The Maybach. The necklace. Her strange confidence. Her words. "It's not suitable for my role this evening." He had spent months, poured millions into research and lobbying, trying to get the attention of the mysterious AR. He had fantasized about this meeting, about the moment he would finally stand face to face with the person who held the key to his empire. All this time he had been sleeping next to them. He had ignored their calls. He had told them what to wear. He had treated them like a decorative object. The room suddenly felt hot, suffocating. The champagne in his hand tasted like ash. He watched his wife across the room now in conversation with a senator and a tech CEO he'd been trying to meet for a year. They were all listening to her. She was the center of that universe, and he was on the outside looking in for the very first time. The hunter had just realized he was the prey. The hum of the crowd began to quiet as David Calloway, the city's beloved philanthropist and the evening's master of ceremonies, tapped the microphone on the grand stage. A cascade of light from the chandeliers above bathed the ballroom in a warm golden glow. Damien stood frozen in place, a statue of dread amidst the sea of oblivious elites. Chloe was beside him. Her earlier confidence shattered, replaced by a nervous, predatory stillness. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here tonight." Calloway's voice boomed rich and inviting. "Your generosity tonight will change the lives of thousands of children at the New York Children's Hospital. We have shattered all previous fundraising records, and that is thanks in no small part to the unprecedented, truly historic contribution of our main sponsor." A ripple of intrigued murmurs went through the room. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Damien's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a desperate, insane hope that he had misunderstood everything, that it was all a bizarre, cruel coincidence, that Madam Chairwoman was an honorary title for some minor subcommittee. His entire world was balanced on the edge of a knife, and Calloway was about to let it drop. For years, the Ethelgard Foundation has operated with quiet dignity and profound impact, guided by the vision of its late founder, Alessandro Rossi. Calloway continued. The name Rossi hung in the air. A few people in the crowd who knew the connection turned to look at Isabella, who was now standing near the front of the stage, her posture one of perfect regal calm. Most, however, were still oblivious. Damien felt Chloe's sharp nails dig into his arm. "Rossi," she hissed. That Rossi Damien couldn't speak. His throat was dry, his mind a maelstrom of denial and terror. Alessandro was a force of nature, a man who believed that true wealth is measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you contribute. Calloway went on, his voice filled with genuine reverence. He shaped our world from the shadows, seeking no credit, only progress. Before he passed, he ensured his legacy would continue, placing his life's work into the hands of a successor he had been preparing since birth. A successor who has until now chosen to honor his tradition of privacy. Damien's eyes were locked on Isabella. She wasn't looking at the stage. She was looking directly at him. Her expression was not triumphant, not angry, not sad. It was empty. It was the look of a judge who had already passed sentence. In that moment he saw the full scope of his catastrophic miscalculation. He hadn't just neglected his wife, he had disdained a monarch without realizing she wore a crown. The leadership of the Ethelgard Foundation is a closely guarded secret, Calloway said, leaning closer to the microphone, his voice dropping conspiratorially. The visionary leader known to the world only as AR is in this room tonight. They have decided that this evening, in honor of Alessandro's memory, and to launch the Foundation's most ambitious initiative, yet it is time to step into the light. The air in the ballroom was thick with anticipation. Phones were being subtly raised. The press, cordoned off at the back, surged forward against the velvet ropes. Damien felt a cold sweat bead on his forehead. He wanted to run, to disappear, but his feet were bolted to the floor. This was his nightmare, and he was the star of it. He thought of the morning of the 11 missed calls. He thought of his condescending tone, his casual dismissal. Probably a crisis over the color of the new hydrangeas. The memory made him physically sick. She hadn't been calling about flowers. She had been grieving the loss of her grandfather. She had been stepping into the role of one of the most powerful people in the world. And she had reached out to him, her husband, and he had sent her to voicemail. "It is my distinct honor." Calloway's voice swelled, filling every corner of the vast room, to introduce to you for the very first time the mind behind the mission, the heart of the Foundation, and the guardian of Alessandro Rossi's legacy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the chairwoman of the Ethelgard Foundation. Damien shut his eyes. He couldn't bear to see it. He could only hear the name that would detonate his life. Mrs. Isabella Rossi Blackwood. For a single drawn-out second, the world stopped. A collective intake of breath seemed to suck the very air from the ballroom. Then a wave of stunned silence, so absolute and profound that the clinking of a single ice cube in a distant glass sounded like a gunshot. Damien's eyes snapped open. It was real. The nightmare was real. Every head in the room, hundreds of them, swiveled in unison. First, they looked towards the stage, then as if pulled by an invisible string, they turned towards him. They were looking for his reaction. He was part of the spectacle. His humiliation was the appetizer to Isabella's main course. He saw it all in a dizzying, slow-motion montage. The dropped jaws, the wide, disbelieving eyes of his competitors, the frantic whispering that erupted like wildfire, spreading from table to table. He saw Marcus Thorne, the Fed chairman, nodding slowly, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He saw Jacob Stern, the private equity king, raise an eyebrow, his calculating gaze flicking from Isabella to Damien, already reassessing deals and power dynamics. And Chloe. He turned to her and saw the blood drain from her face. Her mask of cool ambition was gone, replaced by a raw, ugly look of shock and envy. Her dream of supplanting Isabella, of becoming Mrs. Blackwood, had just been revealed as a pathetic delusion. She hadn't been competing with a simple society wife. She'd been trying to sideline a queen. The realization seemed to age her 10 years in an instant. But it was Isabella who held the room captive. As her name echoed, she took a step forward into the spotlight. The sapphire blue of her dress seemed to absorb the light, making her glow. The Rossi necklace around her neck glittered not as an ornament, but as a sigil of power. She moved with an unhurried, unshakable grace, the picture of serene authority. The quiet, reserved woman Damien had known for 7 years was gone. In her place stood a stranger, a formidable, commanding presence, who owned the very ground she walked on. She ascended the small set of stairs to the stage, her expression calm and composed. She shook David Calloway's hand, murmuring a quiet thank you, before turning to face the audience. She didn't look at the teleprompter. She didn't need it. Her eyes swept across the sea of stunned faces, pausing for a fraction of a second to meet Damien's. In that fleeting glance, he saw the abyss that had opened between them. It was a chasm of his own making, dug with every ignored call, every dismissive comment, every time he had made her feel small, so he could feel big. The silence finally broke, replaced by a smattering of applause, which quickly grew into a thunderous, sustained ovation. It was a recognition of the shock, the drama, the sheer audacity of the reveal. They were applauding the ultimate power play. Damien felt his legs tremble. He had to grip the back of a chair to steady himself. His carefully constructed universe, with him at the center, had just been inverted. He was no longer the sun. He was a forgotten, insignificant moon orbiting a star, whose brilliance he had never even bothered to notice. He watched his wife stand at the podium, a symbol of everything he craved: legacy, respect, true power. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he had lost it all. He had been handed the keys to the kingdom on his wedding day, and in his arrogance he had mistaken them for trinkets. The applause died down, and a hush fell over the room once more. Isabella leaned toward the microphone. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it was clear and resonant, carrying to every corner of the ballroom. It was the voice of a woman who had found her power and was about to use it. "Thank you." She began, her gaze sweeping over the audience deliberately, avoiding her husband. "My grandfather, Alessandro Rossi, believed in a simple principle. True innovation is born not from ambition, but from empathy." The first sentence was a death blow. His entire company was built on ambition. She had just invalidated his whole philosophy of life without ever mentioning his name. Damien felt the blood rushing in his ears, his vision narrowing until the only thing he could see was the woman on stage, the woman he called his wife, systematically dismantling his world. For decades, Isabella continued her voice, holding the rapt attention of everyone in the room. The Ethelgard Foundation has worked to identify and nurture technologies that serve humanity first and profit second. We have operated from the shadows because my grandfather believed that the work should always be more important than the name attached to it. He taught me that integrity is what you do when no one is watching. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and Damien felt each one pierce his soul. His entire business model was built on public perception, on splashy announcements, and the cult of his own personality. He lived for the spotlight, for the watching eyes. "Tonight we are stepping out of those shadows for a singular purpose," she announced. In his final directive, my grandfather entrusted the foundation with the stewardship of a revolutionary clean energy patent, a technology with the potential to reshape our world, to heal our planet, and to democratize power for generations to come. This was it, the patent Damien had been willing to kill for. He watched, helpless, as she spoke of it with an easy familiarity, the way he might talk about a minor corporate acquisition. This technology is too important to be entrusted to a partner driven solely by market share or stock price. Isabella declared, her gaze now sweeping across the CEOs and investors in the room. It requires a partner whose values align with our own. A partner who understands that legacy is not about the buildings you erect, but the foundations you lay for others. A partner who listens, who respects and who values partnership, not as a means to an end, but as a sacred trust. The subtext was so loud, it was practically a scream. She was talking about him. She was telling the entire world, everyone he had ever wanted to impress, that he was unworthy. She was not just rejecting his business. She was dissecting his character and finding it wanting on a global stage. She then announced the Foundation's plan. They would not be selling the patent to a single corporation. Instead, they were opening a multi-billion-dollar innovation grant, inviting companies from around the world to collaborate in an open-source development initiative. She was effectively taking the prize off the table and giving it to the world, making Damien's cutthroat pursuit of it seem greedy and small-minded. Her speech ended with a tribute to her grandfather, her voice softening for the first time with genuine emotion. When she finished, the ballroom erupted. The applause was deafening, a genuine roaring tribute to her vision and power. As she stepped down from the stage, she was immediately swarmed. Marcus Thorne was the first to reach her, followed by a dozen of the most powerful people in the city, all clamoring for a moment of her time. Their business cards extended like offerings. Damien was an island in the middle of the chaos. People who had been fawning over him an hour ago now gave him a wide berth, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. He had become a pariah in his own kingdom. Chloe had already vanished. She knew a sinking ship when she saw one. He had to get to her. He pushed through the crowd, his apologies and excuses ignored. He finally broke through the circle of admirers and stood before his wife. "Isabella," he said, his voice hoarse. She turned to him, her face an unreadable mask. The powerful people around her fell silent, sensing the impending drama. "We need to talk," he pleaded, his voice low and urgent. "In private." "We have nothing to talk about, Damien," she replied, her voice as cold as glacial ice. "You made your position perfectly clear this morning. 11 times. The public shaming was brutal. A few people nearby winced. I didn't know," he hissed, desperate. "If you had told me, if I had any idea who you were. That's the point." She cut him off, her voice dangerously quiet. "You shouldn't have had to know who I was to listen. You only needed to know that I was your wife. The woman who was trying to tell you that her grandfather, the man who walked her down the aisle to you, had just died. But that wasn't important enough for you. The deal was, your ambition was." The truth of her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't about the money or the power he had missed out on. It was about this fundamental human failure. "I'm sorry," he whispered the words, feeling pathetic and hollow. "Izzy, please. Let's go home. We can fix this." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Fix this, Damien. You don't fix a shattered vase. You just sweep up the pieces. And you," she said, her eyes boring into his, "are no longer welcome in my home." She turned her back on him, then giving her full attention to Marcus Thorne, dismissing him as completely and utterly as he had dismissed her calls. The circle of power closed around her, pushing Damien out, leaving him utterly and completely alone in the center of the crowded room. His empire and his marriage turning to dust around him. The fallout was not a wave, but a tsunami. It began the moment Damien stumbled out of the Carlisle, the echoes of applause for his wife, a roaring torment in his ears. The usual phalanx of paparazzi and society reporters paid him no mind, their lenses and questions, all aimed at the hotel's grand entrance, waiting for another glimpse of the woman who had just redrawn the city's entire power map. Damien Blackwood, the man who lived for the camera's flash, had become invisible. His driver, a man who typically leaped out to open the door, simply watched him approach, his expression a careful blank. The ride back to the penthouse was a journey through a silent personal hell, the city lights blurring into streaks of condemnation against the tinted windows. When he arrived, the cavernous apartment felt different. The silence that had once been a symbol of his sterile control was now accusatory, amplifying his solitude. He walked through the marble halls, his footsteps echoing like a judge's gavel. He went to Isabella's dressing room, a space he had always considered a frivolous indulgence. He saw the black Dior gown he had sent for her, still hanging in its garment bag. It looked like a funeral shroud. On the vanity table, a single object was placed in the center, her wedding ring. Next to it was the simple gold band he had given her. The diamonds of her engagement ring glittered under the recessed lighting, looking cold and sharp. The message was absolute. Their marriage wasn't just broken. It had been formally dissolved in her heart long before any court would make it official. He slept for 2 hours in a guest room, a fitful, nightmare-plagued sleep, and awoke to the full fury of the world he had once commanded. His phone, which he had silenced for Isabella, was now a screaming, vibrating beacon of his own implosion. Hundreds of messages, alerts, and missed calls. The headlines were brutal. The Wall Street Journal ran a measured but devastating analysis titled Blackwood's Blind Spot, a crisis of character and governance. The tabloids were less kind. Blackwood blackballed by secret queen wife screamed one. His face was plastered everywhere, a portrait of arrogance moments before the fall, often next to a radiant, powerful image of Isabella on stage. Blackwood Corp's stock opened in a nosedive. The ticker was a river of red, washing away billions in market value before the first morning coffee was finished. The Japanese investors formally retracted their offer in a terse public statement before 9:00 a.m. His board summoned him, not to a meeting, but to a tribunal. He walked into the boardroom of the company he had bled. For the company he had built, from a single idea into a global force, and was met not with sympathy or even anger, but with the cold, dead-eyed pragmatism of men protecting their money. His allies of yesterday were his executioners today. The chairman of the board, a man Damien had personally installed, didn't even offer him a seat. The reputational damage is catastrophic. Damien, the chairman, stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Your personal life has compromised the fiduciary duty we have to our shareholders. Your judgment has been called into question in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. This is a private matter. Damien roared, his voice cracking. It has nothing to do with the company's performance. It has everything to do with it. A woman from the board, Eleanor Vance, countered coolly. You spent millions and months of corporate resources chasing a patent held by your own wife. You failed to perform the most basic due diligence. You were either grossly negligent or you were lying to this board. Which is it? Damien had no answer. He stood there exposed and powerless as they invoked clause after clause from his contract, systematically stripping him of his power. First, his role as chairman was suspended. Then an interim CEO was appointed effective immediately. By the end of the hour, he was escorted to his office by security to collect his personal belongings, as he boxed up a few photos and a single heavy award. He could see the new CEO, a man who had once been his subordinate, already directing people to change the nameplate on his door. He was erased. The empire he had constructed had devoured him. Meanwhile, Isabella was not celebrating. She had spent the night after the gala in a quiet suite at the plaza, a location her security team had prepared weeks in advance. She had known this confrontation was a possibility, a final terrible option if Damien proved himself to be the man she feared he had become. Her first call was not to her lawyers, but to the New York Children's Hospital, authorizing an immediate wire transfer of the gala's proceeds, plus a supplemental anonymous donation from her personal accounts that doubled the total. Her second call was to the head of her family's estate in Geneva to begin making arrangements for her grandfather's memorial. Her grief for Alessandro was a deep, steady ache, but it was now interwoven with a new grief for her marriage. She had loved Damien, or at least the man she believed him to be, the ambitious, driven young man who had seemed so full of promise. But she now understood that his ambition wasn't a fire that built things. It was a black hole that consumed them. It had consumed their love, his integrity, and finally his own creation. In the months that followed, their worlds diverged so completely, it was as if they had lived on different planets all along. Damien became a ghost. He holed up in a 5-star hotel, living off his severance package, a gilded prison, where he could watch the world move on without him. He'd spend his days in a bitter alcohol-fueled haze, flipping through channels only to be confronted by Isabella's image. There she was, meeting with the UN Secretary General. There she was on the cover of Time magazine, lauded as a New Age philanthropist, reinventing the rules. There she was announcing the first recipients of the Ethelgard Clean Energy Grant, a consortium of innovative startups, including one led by a brilliant young scientist Damien had arrogantly dismissed a year prior. His attempts to reconnect with his old life were met with polite, impenetrable walls. The friends who had once clamored for his invitations now had their secretaries inform him they were in a meeting. He was a social leper, a cautionary tale whispered at the very galas he once dominated. In the lonely, quiet hours of the night, the memory of the 11 missed calls would return to haunt him. He would see her name flashing on his screen, feel the phantom vibration in his hand, and remember the casual, contemptuous swipe of his thumb. It was the single most destructive act of his life, an act of such profound arrogance that it had cost him everything. He hadn't just lost a company or a fortune. He had lost the chance to stand beside a truly great woman, not as her master, but as her equal. The depth of that loss was an ocean, and he was drowning in it. Isabella, conversely, had never been more alive. She shed the Blackwood from her name as easily as a snake sheds its skin, becoming simply Isabella Rossi. She stepped into the role her grandfather had prepared her for, with a natural, commanding grace. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was a visionary. She traveled the world, her focus shifting from society galas to field sites for clean water projects and mobile health clinics. She spoke not in the empty corporate jargon Damien favored, but with a quiet intelligence and genuine empathy that moved people. She discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, a resilience forged in the lonely silence of her marriage. She learned that power wasn't about dominating a room, it was about inspiring it. Legacy wasn't your name on a building, it was the lives you changed for the better. The final divorce decree arrived for Damien on a cold Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a stoic courier. It was just a stack of papers, the legal codification of a reality he had been living for months. He signed them without reading his hand steady. The rage had burned out, leaving only a hollowed-out landscape of regret. It was over. On that same day, Isabella was in her grandfather's old office overlooking Central Park. Her lawyer called with the news. She thanked him, her voice even. After hanging up, she didn't move for a long time. She looked out at the autumn leaves, a riot of gold and red against the grey sky. She felt a pang, a ghost of a memory of her and Damien walking through that same park years ago, when their future had seemed as bright and full of colour as the trees before her. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, not for the man he became, but for the man she had hoped he would be. Then the intercom on her desk buzzed. "Madam Chairwoman," her assistant's voice came through crisp and respectful. "The architects for the new research hospital are here to see you." Isabella wiped the tear away. The past was the past. Her grief had been honored, her accounts settled. The future was waiting. She had lost a husband who saw her as an accessory. But she had found her purpose. She had inherited an empire of wealth, but she had built an empire of self. "Send them in," she said, her voice filled with a calm, unshakable strength. "We have work to do." Isabella's journey from a silenced wife to a global force serves as a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most to say. Her story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about reclaiming her name, her power, and her voice from a world and a man that tried to render her invisible. She proved that true strength isn't about the noise you make or the attention you demand, but about the integrity you hold when no one is watching. Damien's empire was built on sand, on the fragile ego of one man. Hers is built on a foundation of purpose, a legacy that will outlive them all. Her story is a testament to the fact that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake you ever make. If Isabella's incredible story of transformation and justice inspired you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own hidden strength. And most importantly, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of karma empowerment and the shocking secrets hidden just beneath the surface. Thank you for listening.